Hi, my name is Jim Larsen, and I volunteer as a tour guide at the World Trade Center Memorial in downtown Manhattan. Today, I would like to take you on that same tour, so you can sit at home in your living rooms and take the tour. Well, the first thing I'm going to show you is not on the tour. As I was walking over, I thought that it might be a good idea to add this into the tour. This is called 11 Tears. It's a memorial to the 11 American Express employees who were killed on September 11, 2001. The pool that you see has 11 sides. Each side has the name of one of the persons. Above the pool, you see suspended, and you'll get a better look at that in the next picture, but suspended there is a 350-pound piece of Brazilian crystal, also cut to 11 sides. In addition, periodically 11 drops of water, sequenced, hit the pool and spread out. The dropping into the pool of each individual drop is a memory of a person, one of the 11 people. But then the 11 people in the pool, the water comes together, and it's a theme that says they are now one. It's a very, very beautiful, simple memorial. As you can see, that's the crystal, 350 pounds, suspended over the memorial pool. We begin our tour at number 10 house. This is the firehouse that was built in support and established in support of the original World Trade Center. The theory was that they needed a firehouse really nearby in case of any emergencies. On September 11th, 2001, these were not the first firemen to respond to the disaster. However, they were downtown. They were working some other emergency. They did come back uptown, and they did respond to the emergency at the World Trade Center, and in doing so, they lost 6 of their members. This plaque is on the side of 10 House and is a memorial to the 6 members of 10 House who lost their lives on that tragic day. As we round the corner onto Greenwich Street, there is another small plaque on the wall. This plaque was dedicated to a man called Glenn Winnick. Glenn Winnick was a partner in a law firm in downtown Manhattan and was not part of the fire group. However, he was a volunteer fireman in his town out in Long Island. On September 11th, Glenn Winnick got up from his desk, ran down to the 10 house that we just saw, borrowed some equipment, and went into the rescue efforts. Glenn Winnick was killed that day. The law firm of Holland and Knight dedicated this plaque and the next plaque that you will see to Glenn Winnick and the 343 firemen who were killed on that day. This plaque was also donated by Holland and Knight and is in remembrance of the 343 firemen. You can't see it too well in the picture, but there are some distinctive things about this plaque. First of all, the firemen that are depicted there have their helmets on, but there are no numbers on any of the helmets. And if you look at the faces, there are no definite features on any one. And this was because the artist felt, again, that there were not individuals, but 343 brothers working together. The plaque is 56 feet long, 6 feet high. Along the bottom are the names of each fireman that was killed that day. Next to the names, in some of them, there is an asterisk. The asterisk notes that that particular fireman, let's say he was a lieutenant, but he had taken the test for captain before September 11th. The captainship was awarded to him posthumously in honor of his service on that day. Okay. I couldn't get the entire plaque in one photograph, so this is the other side of the plaque. The first side denoted the responders, the first responders rushing in to the disaster. The middle of the plaque pictures the 2 towers burning. And this side of the plaque is the aftermath. As we continue on along Greenwich Street, we'll look back and you see the new World Trade Center tower, and also number 7 World Trade Center, which is a completed building and is occupied, fully occupied at this point. I'm a history buff. I love history. And I get a chance to talk about the history of downtown New York when I go along on these tours. The area that the World Trade Center was in was a prosperous trading area. Ships came from all over the world and berthed in Manhattan. And goods were traded, sometimes on the street, sometimes hauled away to warehouses. But the business boomed. Then, as the ships got bigger, they could no longer be berthed along in Manhattan. So they had to be moved out. They went to cargo ships, went to Brooklyn, New Jersey, Staten Island, and the area of downtown Manhattan started to go a little seedy. The area that the World Trade Center was in was called Radio Row. And there were a bunch of little mom and pop stores in there that would sell you parts for your radio or television or anything you liked. And that was about what was here. It was just a little bit run down. Then in the late 1960s, the governors of New York and New Jersey got together using their vehicle, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and decided to build a new World Trade Center that would revitalize this downtown area. And hence, by the late 1970s, it was built. One of the first obstacles they had to overcome was, what do you do with all the dirt that you dig out of a 70-foot deep, 16-acre wide hole? And they decided to build a catchment area along West Street. If you look at the photograph of downtown Manhattan, that was before the World Trade Center was there. And if you look to the left, you see a little bit of dirt area. That area was claimed back. 26 acres was claimed back. They built a wall. They kept filling the wall, filling in the hole with the dirt that they took out of the trade center, and eventually it became Battery Park City and the World Financial Center. However, they had to wait 10 years for the fill to settle before they could start to build on it. As we continue on down Greenwich Street, you'll see a building in front of you. This building is the home of the American Stock Exchange. It was established in 1921. Before it was established, stocks were traded in the street, and hence they were called the stock market was called the curb market, because people stood on the curb and traded stocks. If you pass the building now and you look up, there is an inscription along the top of the building, and the inscription says the curb market. But if you go around onto Broadway, it's called the American Stock Exchange. Now, we've skipped along a little here. We've gone through our security checks. You didn't have to go through them, but everybody else does. And while I go through, I talk to these people about the fires that burned for months on the site of the World Trade Center. And the fact that everyone south of Canal Street in Manhattan were evacuated. People were told, down in that area, people were told you have 1 hour to go back into your dwelling, your apartment or whatever, pick up whatever you can that you need to take with you in order to sustain yourself until you can get back in again. Well, some people didn't get back for a year. Could you imagine having to go into your home and say, what could I take that would last me for 1 year? However, the area population of this downtown area, Canal Street down to the Battery, has doubled since 2001. And the population of Battery Park City at the time of the incident was 9,000 people. It is now 14,000. It's becoming very fashionable now to stay within walking distance of your work. As when we were growing up or when we were in business, it seemed that you wanted to go to the suburbs and make a long commute, but at least you'd be in the country during the day. That kind of thinking has changed. Okay, we've set ourselves off on a little side of the park here so that we can talk. This whole area, for many people, is considered hallowed ground. On September 11th, 2001, 2,749 people lost their lives here. Of that, 1,121 victims were never identified. But I must correct that and say that about 3 weeks ago, after 10 years, they did identify another person. So that number is now 1,120. For the people who lost loved ones here and never had them identified, this is also kind of a cemetery. It's a place, the only place where they can go and remember their own people. There are some 30,000 body parts stored at the coroner's office in Uptown Manhattan. Once the museum is completed, those 30,000 body parts will be brought down and put into a special area in the museum so that at any time they can take them out for DNA testing and perhaps show another person, find another person. If we look over at the South Pool, which is what you see in front of you now, that was the site of the South Tower of the World Trade Center. It's now the Memorial Pool. We'll get a better look at it as we go along, but right now, take a look over there. Each one of the towers was 110 floors high, and each occupied 1 acre of land, and the memorial pools depict the footprint of each of those two buildings. Strangely enough, the windows in the World Trade Center were no wider than a man's shoulders. And the reason for that was that the architect who designed the building was afraid of height. He felt that if you were looking out through big picture windows, you would kind of get the feeling of falling or be afraid of falling. But if the windows were at shoulder width, you wouldn't get that same reaction. And I think he was right. There were sky lobbies in each of the buildings, so that the elevators, instead of running to every floor, there were express elevators. If I went into the building and was going to my floor, which was the 65th floor of the World Trade Center, I would get on an elevator, take that elevator up to the 44th floor, which is Sky Lobby Express, and then walk over and take a local up to the 65th floor. Hence, if I was working on the upper floors, there was another Sky Lobby at the 72nd floor. But in the core of the building, there were over 100 elevator shafts. The core of the building also contained the water system for the entire building, the electrical system for the entire building, and the emergency staircases. The rest of the building was built out from the core on a steel structure, and it was called an exoskeleton. That meant that there were no columns required anywhere through the offices. There was a center core and there were the outer walls. So you could see from one side of the building to the other without anything being in your way. Also, the buildings would sway 7 feet on any given day, maybe a little bit more if it was windier. Some people, in order to counteract that, would have to take Dramamine on windy days if they were working up at the tops of one of the buildings. Also, the area, the entire World Trade Center complex, was surrounded by slurry walls. The fear was that if anything happened to the World Trade Center, the river, which had been just across the street before it was filled in, the river could breach and come in. So what they did was they built a reverse bathtub. If you can picture a reverse bathtub, it would be to keep the water out rather than to keep the water in. And on September 11th, the biggest concern was that the slurry wall would be breached. And if it was breached, it would have flooded every subway system in all of Manhattan. What you're looking at now is a close-up of the memorial pool for the South Tower of the original towers. The water comes out of the sides of the memorial pool up at the top and cascades down 32 feet. 16 pumps pump that water in individual riblets. It's like little streams, almost like coming out of your kitchen faucet. But when it reaches the bottom of the pool, it merges. Okay? All the themes seem to be around small individuals coming together and merging into one pool. The memorial is considered a void within a void. As you can see, the big pool is on the outside, and then if you look in the center there, you see a second pool and a second falling of water. That's the void within the void. There are 2,983 victims honored here at these two pools. Now, I told you earlier that 2,749 people were killed here. The rest, to make up to 2,983, the rest were people who were killed at the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and the aircraft that crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania after the people on board the aircraft took it back from the terrorists, but not in time before it crashed. I tell people to take a little walk around and just meditate. Just take a look at the pools and get a feel for the memorial. And then I would meet them at the next stop. The tree you see here is called the survivor tree. It's a Callery pear tree that was discovered in October of 2001, a little ways from where it stands right now. It was in terrible shape. It was part of the wreckage. The roots were all chopped up. The tree's branches were broken off, and it was in terrible shape. It was taken up to the Bronx Botanical Gardens and nurtured for 10 years. In 2010, however, there was a tremendous windstorm, and the tree was again uprooted. But again, it survived. And it was brought down here in September of 2011 and planted here. And it is called, as I said before, the survivor tree. All the other trees you see in the memorial are white swamp oaks. There are 225 white swamp oak trees planted here now. Ultimately, there will be 400. These swamp oaks will grow to a height of 60 feet high and will provide a green covering over the entire memorial park. Okay, if you look to the right-hand side of the picture, you'll see the wall of the other memorial pool. That was for the North Tower. And standing there, standing in the middle of the picture, is another guide. We work out of the same office. He's talking to 25 English school children who are attending the memorial. In 1993, two gentlemen in a van packed with explosives drove up West Street down into the underground parking lots underneath the buildings, the World Trade Center buildings, and departed, went somewhere else in Manhattan, and detonated the explosives. Their intention was to knock down the North Tower, and when it fell, it would fall into the South Tower. This didn't happen, though. It blew out 5 floors in the underground garage, but the columns, the support columns, were never blown out. They stood. The floors were blown out. 6 people were killed, but a lot was found out about the building's safety conditions. It took almost all day to get people out of the buildings, evacuated out of that North Tower. So, certain changes were made in anticipation of something happening in the future. Some of those were better lighting in the emergency staircases, a better backup system for the generators, which were in the basement and were immediately flooded when the water pipes in the basement gave way and the basement filled up with water. At this point, the gentleman in the picture is starting his story. And he was a fireman. He was a first responder. And he's going to tell these children about what happened to him on that particular day. I, in turn, in my tours, talk to them about being a survivor in the building on the 65th floor on September 11, 2001. On that day, 2 aircraft left Boston, one behind the other. They were loaded with fuel, fully loaded with fuel. They were supposed to go to the West Coast. The men flying the aircraft were not pilots by any stretch of the imagination. All they knew how to do was, once the aircraft was off the ground and up, they knew how to steer it. They didn't really know much about navigation either. So the best thing they could do was fly out of Boston, identify the Hudson River, make a sharp left, come down the Hudson River, and impact the buildings, which is what they did. At 8:46 a.m. on September 11, 2001, the first plane came down following the Hudson River and hit the North Tower on the north side. It hit between the 93rd and 99th floors. Hence, 1,355 people were trapped above the 99th floor. The staircases, the elevators, the water system, and the electric system were cut. And at that point, they were dead even before anything else happened. It must have been a terrible thing to think that these people had 2 choices. They could remain in the building and burn to death, or they could jump out the windows. And in fact, the first fireman killed on that day was killed by a falling body. I was there for both the 1993 and the 2001 incidents. On September 1st, 2001, I was on the 65th floor on the west side of the building, and at 8:46 in the morning, there was a tremendous wallop, a whack. The building leaned over, and I thought I was dead. I thought the building was going to fall. It didn't. It snapped back, leaned the other way, and then snapped back, and a few more times it stood still. I looked around the building, and I could only see 2 other people other than me. And that was a phenomenon in itself. On that day, there were 17,400 people in the World Trade Center. Normally, there should have been 52,000 people in the World Trade Center. However, it was primary day, primary elections for the mayor of New York. It was also the first day of school. So people had off to go vote. People had off to take their kids off to school. In addition, the New York Giants had played the Denver Broncos the night before in Denver, Colorado. Because of the time difference, a lot of people stayed up very late to watch the game. Those people elected to either not come to work or to come to work late. So it was almost a miracle, but a lot of people that should have been there weren't there. I know all of you have seen the World Trade Center before, but take another look at it. This was my home for 13 years. It was the place that I spent the most time other than home, my own personal home. And it was a beautiful, beautiful place. We used to go out into the plaza, listen to music in the summertime. In the wintertime, we'd go down to the Winter Garden. And again, we'd listen to music. It was indoors, but it was large, and we just loved the place. It was a great place to live. And that day, it was taken away from us. And on that day, we were left with this: the aftermath of one of the most terrible disasters ever. The new World Trade Center will be the site of Tower Number 1, which will in fact replace the 2 towers that were originally there. If you look at the picture of this tower, you'll see that the bottom is square, but as it goes up, it becomes an 8-sided building. If you could imagine taking the 2 World Trade Center footprints and putting them together, kind of one or diagonally with the other one, you would end up with 8 sides. And that's what it represents. It represents 2 buildings that were there before it. building with the reflection on it, 7 World Trade Center, was the home of U.S. Customs and many other buildings. And I believe I told you before that it is fully occupied now. The rebuilding of this World Trade Center and the memorial is symbolic of the resistance, the resilience of New Yorkers, and how we can overcome anything. The new tower, the new World Trade Center tower, will rise to 104 floors. At that point, it will be topped by a spire, which will raise the total height of the building to 1,776 feet, which here in the States is very significant. 1,776 feet being when we got our independence from the British. This is the National Museum. It was scheduled to open in September of 2012, but it looks like it might not make that. The building, when you walk into the museum, you will have to go down 7 floors before you reach the exhibits. They're all below ground. They're all on bedrock. In addition, I believe I noted before that the remains of the unidentified body parts will also be stored down there, along with fire trucks, ambulances, and other paraphernalia that were left over after September 11th. I spoke to you before about the Winter Garden. And the Winter Garden was a place that we used to go to on our lunch hours, and if we took a little break in the afternoon or something like that, or if I had a visitor come, I would take them over there just to show it to them. It was a beautiful, beautiful place. The palm trees were so unique. And as I said, there were band concerts and other things that would keep you interested. However, after September 11th, there was a change to the Winter Garden. The Winter Garden was completely destroyed. In October of 2011, 2001, I was asked if I would accompany a VIP tour of the World Trade Center site. It was still burning at that time, and it was still a complete disaster area. We drove down, and we couldn't go down West Street, so we had to go down alongside the river, along footpaths. We were in police cars, and we drove along the side. And I looked back at this Winter Garden, as you see it here in this picture, and it broke my heart. I always thought that it looked like a good friend who somebody had just torn the flesh off and left just the skeleton. And it really was sad for me. We continued on, and they had a viewing platform set up where you could look down onto the site. And I walked around and looked down onto the site, and it was like looking into hell. There were people down there moving around. There were fires burning. There were people with masks on and oxygen tanks, just moving as if they had no purpose or anything. And I really did think this would be what I would see if I went to hell. I didn't come back to the site for 10 years. I didn't want to. I didn't want to see it. I wouldn't come back for any money. However, after 10 years, I was reading our retirement newsletter, Port Authority retirement newsletter, and it said that they were looking for volunteers to conduct tours at the World Trade Center. And I thought, well, perhaps it's time to come back. And I did. And I must say, it's been a reward. I work with people, great people, and I take people on tours, but the people they take on tours are from Britain, Australia, Indonesia, the Philippines, everywhere in the world. And I feel that it just goes to show that we're no longer just New Yorkers or just Americans. We're part of a global community, and the people in that global community are as concerned as we are. And each tour I take, at this point in time, I say thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being concerned. And that's the end of our tour. Thank you.